how would or how should I pronounce this as a non-American person, my friend?
Jonatan Crafoord.
Much better.
But that's
that's
yeah.
and that's exactly why I didn't do it.
The future of music.
The future of music. The future of music.
The future of music.
The future of music.
The Future of Music podcast.
Hey there, and welcome once again to the Future of Music podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive in the future of music. I am one of your hosts, Ryan Withrow. I am joined by my great friend, a caring individual, Jonathan Boyd, over here. And Jonathan, it's about to get confusing today because I've got to deal with multiples of that name. We'll get through it. We'll figure it out. But, until then, what should we get excited about? I know what's coming. I know that I am extremely pumped up for this episode and conversation and guest. They have no clue. So what should they get stoked about?
Yeah, so I actually think that this is going to be one of our biggest conversations, best conversations yet. And I'm super excited because we're going to be talking about a lot of the things that you and I always talk about, which is the rise of virtual instruments, the whole idea that people are going to be able to start making music, and they already are, and that's what we're going to be talking about, making music in virtual reality, in augmented reality, etc. We'll talk about what does the future look like for, let's say, for composition, for writing songs, for collaboration, concerts, recording. What does all that look like? It's all starting to change already, and we're going to deep dive with somebody who's already deep in the deep end of all this stuff. And then, another big question that we're going to dive into is traditional instruments. Guitars, pianos, trumpets, saxophone. What's going to happen? Is anything going to happen? Is that going to change? Are more people going to play? We're going to dive into all that stuff here in just a second.
All that and more when you click like, subscribe, and the alerts button to be reminded of every episode that comes out. And also, if you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, make sure you follow us because you are also notified every time an episode hits you and comes out. And for those of you that already are following, thank you. We really do appreciate you. We're so happy to have you, and we'll just keep doing this until you're too annoyed with us. So I'm sorry, but we'll keep going. But all that being said, I think it's time to start to dive in with our guest. All right, my friends, as you could see, we are joined by Jonatan Crafoord here. And I had to say it that way because I am in America, and I feel like I would completely butcher the name otherwise. How would or how should I pronounce this as a non-American person, my friend?
Jonatan Crafoord.
Much better.
But that's
yeah.
And that's
exactly why I didn't do it. Perfect. All right, so phenomenal. And I'm really excited because you are currently the creative director at Really Interactive. But, your history, your career spans quite a bit and into a bunch of different areas. You're programmer focused on development of games and real-time applications, mainly in Unity and C#. And you've worked professionally in the game industry since 2007. Yeah. That's insane. That's amazing. Angry Birds 2, which I think is like one of the most addicting games as well, is the Angry Birds movement. Minecraft as well. Minecraft Dungeons, I believe, is what you focused on. Yeah, and your most recent work, what we're going to be talking about here, obviously, is AR and VR, mobile as well. And the reason we're really talking is because of Virtuoso. So Virtuoso is this music program that aims to transform the way we create music through the use of virtual instruments. But for me, it was like my first introduction to this world of no actual physical instrument, VR, music production and creation, and just fun and creativity. So it inspired me to reach out to y'all. So welcome, my friend. It is so good to have you. And I think we just kind of dive right in. And it's going to be funny because I have to say like Jonathan Boyd versus Jonatan Crafoord. But Jonathan Boyd, my friend, where do we want to go? Because there's so much we need to unpack, and there's so much I'm excited to talk about. But where do we even?
Yeah, I think for the other Jonathan, where I'd love to hear about is how did you even get into this space, and how did you manage to become the creative director where you are right now?
Right. So let's. First of all, thanks for the great introduction, and yeah, I'm super happy to be here on the podcast. So let me start with the first question. Like, how did I get into this space? And we're talking about like the VR AR space specifically, or are we talking about like audio for games and real
Yeah,
time
VR and AR
applications?
specifically.
VR and AR. Let's go there then. Yeah, so it really started, I think, back in 2016 when I bought a Vive. So Vive being like the top of the line headset back then for virtual reality, and I just really saw the potential, especially in the controllers, the hand controllers, for like doing input in 3 dimensions, like moving them forward, backward, twisting them. Like they're so much more powerful than what things you can do with just like a mouse and keyboard. So pretty soon after that, I started experimenting with using this for audio and using it for music, and that's kind of how the path towards Virtuoso started really back then. And in 2017, we started a company, or actually back in 2016 already, we started our current company around doing VR applications, and specifically VR applications with a focus on like new forms of interactions and interactivity, which then became the company Really Interactive, which is where I am at right now.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So I was actually going to ask you about how did the music side come into this, because obviously Virtuoso is all about playing music, and you're taking the VR, the virtual aspect of things, and combining it with how do we actually create music with this. So you're a musician yourself, I assume?
Yeah, so my background is actually in
Okay.
music from the beginning. So I studied at the College of Music in Stockholm originally, and I actually wanted to be a producer for rock music back when I was in school. But then the whole music industry was kind of tanking with the digital downloads, with like Napster becoming popular back then. This was in the early 2000s. And I kind of had this feeling. I didn't know back then that this was due to the shift with digital distribution, but I had this feeling that like the whole music business was just so cynical and jaded, and everyone was just unhappy all the time. So I wanted to go somewhere else. So I started looking at the games industry, because I played a lot of games throughout my life, and figured maybe I can do some like music composition for games or something like that. And haven't looked back since. I started getting into the games industry, started doing music, and then soon after started doing sound design for music for games as well. I worked at for a couple of years at a big AAA studio here in Stockholm called Grin as a sound designer. Before they went bankrupt, that's a whole big story around that. And then I moved briefly to the UK to work on the Little Big Planet franchise as a sound designer. And then moved back, worked on, like we talked about before, worked on Angry Birds 2, Minecraft Dungeons, with audio stuff. So like audio direction, technical sound design. But really I started programming, I think it was like 12 years ago or something like that, and I've always been interested in like starting my own companies, running my own projects. So that kind of led me to get into Unity and C#, and doing games programming really. And I guess Virtuoso is kind of my way of combining all of these different disciplines into one thing. So it's like it has a lot to do with my music background, but also with like the coding side of things, and then with my interest in virtual reality. It all kind of merges together in this one place.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I think that really that whole area of like soundtrack and sound design for video game, that industry is so incredible to me, especially with those people like Mick Gordon out there. You know, like king of the 9-string guitar for his soundtracks.
I've listened
I
so
listen to that
much to the
constantly.
Doom soundtrack. That's just so great.
I know, and it's amazing. But then you see, the downfalls of that as well, considering you saw that drama
Yeah.
between the other one. But yeah, it's amazing, right? Because now we have these soundtracks that are coming out for games specifically, but they stand on their own anymore. A lot of them are just so phenomenal and well done. So really interesting for me, really interesting, but really cool. And Jonathan, other Jonathan, Bald Jonathan. We'll just say Jonathan
It's my
Bald.
last name, actually.
It's not very.
No, so
That's okay.
so before we
You're
dive
getting
in
that.
more to Virtuoso, I'm really curious to hear about, was there like a certain moment, was there a certain time period where obviously you have a background in games, you have a background in music in general, and was there a certain time where you were like, okay, I'm really curious to see how can we take music and creating music and playing music in the virtual world? How did that even come about?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a gradual process for me with as soon as my interest in virtual reality started, because that was really the first time I started working with like an audio related project, specifically an audio related project as a programmer. And originally it kind of started as me just wanting to explore the use of the tracked controllers, like I talked about before, for controlling audio or controlling music. So like using them for expression, things like that. And it was really a hobby project from the beginning. I connected my Vive to my digital audio workstation over network, and kind of started using it to control synthesizers inside of Reaper, for example. And I was working on it in my spare time. I really got into it like as a very fun like hobby project to have on the side while we were doing other things, like mostly games at Really Interactive. And decided kind of early on that I wanted to keep it as a hobby project for as long as possible and not really think about the commercial aspects, but just like take it where I wanted to go with it and not look too closely at what other people were doing with audio for VR. So it went like that for a couple of years, and then I had this moment when I was playing with was at home playing Tilt Brush and playing was then the seed to Virtuoso, with my colleague Björn, and he was messing around in Virtuoso, and at that point it was really kind of aimed at professional musicians more. And he doesn't have a music background, but he was just having so much fun with it, like making these weird noises and just having a great time while I was painting in Tilt Brush, and I'm not an artist. So it was kind of this sense of us playing together as complete amateurs with something very creative. And I think that's the point where we both realized that, oh man, this can really be like a fun thing for people who aren't that familiar with music. Even like we can bring this to a broader audience. We can expand on it and release it like as a fun app for everyone, and make music creation in VR kind of accessible and available for a lot of people. So that's the point where we kind of decided to bring it into the company and start working on it with the whole team. And 2 years later, we released it on the MetaQuest platform and on Steam VR. And now we're like a year down the road from there, and it's been going pretty well.
That's amazing. Yeah. So this topic in general is something that we actually talk about a lot, and that is the rise in general of digital instruments, or people being able to learn music, play music without a traditional instrument like a guitar, piano, violin, etc. So it's really fascinating, obviously, to hear somebody who has kind of had somewhat of a similar vision and actually gone down the path of creating something like this to where now we're here talking. We're able to talk about Virtuoso. So I would love to hear about, you just kind of shared a little bit about the original vision for Virtuoso. How did it kind of how was it born? How did it develop? You said it was originally aimed at professional musicians, but then you had that experience to where you could see that it could reach a much broader audience and it could be just a lot of fun for people. And that's kind of along the lines of what we're thinking as well. So as you have released the app, obviously it's had some success. We've played it. It's a lot of fun. What have been some of the challenges for not only growing the app on your side, but the challenges for user adoption?
Yeah. So first of all, I kind of want to address what you said about the classical instruments and moving into the digital space, because I thought about something that's kind of fun there, and that's that if you look at like a traditional music instrument, the user experience of learning to play a traditional music experience is not very good, is it? Like it's the first time user experience. If you look at it as a game developer and you're like, yeah, pick up a violin and learn to play the violin, how great is that first time user experience? And it takes a long time before you get anywhere fun with it. And really that's kind of the core at where we started with like transitioning this into an app that's supposed to be for everyone, because especially my colleague Björn is super interested in user experience design and user interface design. So we have like a really good synergy in the team there between me and him, where like we try to design this in a way that is not confusing for first time users in the same way that a violin is confusing, or that like learning to play a guitar is confusing. Like the setup of the strings, the like the intervals between them, just for a guitar, it's even inconsistent. Like, what's the range between the different strings? Like, there's so much stuff going on that's just not a great experience. So, I think that's one of the points where we can also work more with user adoption as well. Like, if we can make it very, very easy to get into, like have good tutorials that are interactive, and have it make sense from the beginning. Like, oh, you push this and you make a sound, and then you push this next thing and it makes the sound that you expect it to do. And there's not a lot of like difficult technique involved in even making a sound, which is the case for like some wind instruments or brass instruments, right? So I think that's our starting point for user adoption and accessibility, really.
Yeah, and it's so funny because you're actually describing a lot of the vision that Ryan and I and our whole team has been talking about for a number of years at this point. Two of the biggest things that I've always said is that you refer to it as user experience, which is what it is, but it's really fascinating to see you come at this from a game developer's perspective, like you said, and see it as a user experience. I've said the same thing, but the way I look at it is the two biggest barriers keeping people from playing music. Like, we all have some music or something inside of us that we want to express, right? But the instrument, the interface, as you said, and the concept of having to learn what people call music theory. There's two big, huge barriers that keep them from doing that. And I think your experience with your friend pointed directly at what we've been talking about this whole time, and what you are also talking about, and what you're aiming to do with Virtuoso, which is so amazing, which is giving people a platform to literally go express themselves through music without having to go through all of the hardships of learning a physical instrument and learning, what most people consider like a PhD level music theory to ever be able to sound good. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, we typically try to kind of have a tiered approach to how much music theory we introduce to the player, where to beginning to like players who are just starting out, we just hide away everything that has to do with music theory. There's no music theory up front, and then you can kind of go into submenus, into depth, and like adjust things in ways. If you are a professional musician and you want to change something, like, yeah, I want to change the key, I want to change the included notes in the key, stuff like that. But it's not like upfront and the first thing that you see as a user. So we've worked quite a lot with also simplifying concepts, like the lingo, if you want, like the language around music production, to make it like immediately make sense, even if you're not familiar with the terms. And this has some upsides and some downsides, obviously, because the risks is, of course, that it translates worse when you're moving from Virtuoso into some other music application, like, oh, where's the tempo sync feature? Oh, it's called quantize, right? Okay, yeah. So stuff like that, where we typically try to make more sense from the beginning. Like, what does this do? It says on the label.
Yeah, and that's also another thing that I've thought about extensively, really, because music theory, which from the outside is what people think that you need to learn in order to play music, which is not true. Music theory is just a labeling system to communicate music ideas in
Yeah.
spoken language, right? So what you're referring to is taking those concepts and packaging them in such a language that they might instantly know or be able to relate to, so they can have an understanding of what it actually does. And I think that is part of the shortcut to getting what you're talking about. So that's the part of user adoption, and I think that we've sort of illustrated the pathway there, continually simplifying, making things easier for people to just get into. It makes sense. They have fun. They keep doing it. That's basically what it boils down to. But what about on your side? What about on the business side? Something like this is it's quite a bit of a different project, because let's say you release a game like a first person shooter game. Everybody knows what that is, and it might be a different game, and they will immediately play it and try it out if other people are having fun with it. But something like this, what's the general approach to getting people to even understand what it is, try it out the first time, and then also on your end, on the business side, what are some of the challenges with actually growing something like this?
There's been a lot of challenges relating to this specifically, actually. First of all, just the whole thing of like, how do we package this? Is it an app or is it a game? And there's been so many discussions around that with both internally, and we also with our publisher. So we use a publisher for outreach with Virtuoso. So we're working with Fast Travel Games, that are VR specific publisher. So they help us with things like marketing, public relations, and outreach in general. But just like in discussions also with Meta, who we released Virtuoso on their platform, and they were quite adamant early on that like this is not a game, it's an app. And we kind of wanted early on to market it more as a game, because we want it to feel accessible in the way a game is. It's not necessarily supposed to be a tool. It's supposed to be something that you do for fun, for starters at least. But now it is what it is. We're calling it an app, and I mean, apps can be fun as well. So, but there's definitely been challenges, both in terms of how to label it, but also in terms of like how to package the whole thing, how to explain to people what it is that makes it fun, and then also finding like the right target audience for it. Like, is it gamers? Is it musicians? Is it somewhere in between? And that's been a challenge, I think, especially with virtual reality. The way the market looks right now, it's very game centric, game focused. There's a lot of shooters, for example, that are performing really well in VR, and we're very far from being a shooter, right? So that like the core audience that are in VR isn't necessarily gonna look for a music app. So how do we make it enticing for them when we put it in front of them? Or do we even like disregard that and try to just broaden the market with people who are interested in music in general? And I think for me, that's kind of the route that I would like to take. I'm not that concerned about the current audience in VR not being a good fit for Virtuoso. As long as we can keep developing it and selling it, I'm happy to bide my time. I think VR will, and AR especially, will eventually reach much broader adoption. And by the time it does, I think Virtuoso is going to be interesting for a lot of people who are specifically interested in music, but might not necessarily be in it for the games.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think
that's
so.
good.
And actually, I have a lot more ideas about that. And, we can talk after the podcast. But I think in terms of the positioning of, you were mentioning Meta saying, yes, it's an app. I think the positioning of app versus game, having it be called an app actually might be a benefit in the long run, because think about, why do people use apps? People use apps as tools, like you said, to do something with it. And in general, a game by definition is something for leisure. So people play games. It's not that serious of a thing. So if I am kind of on the outside of the market, and maybe I'm not even aware of VR, but let's say for people who are aware of VR, if they say, hey, there's this music game I want you to try, well, it might kind of sound like a game, right? Like it's a waste of time. I don't find great, whatever. It might be fun for a minute, but I'm not going to do it. But if it's an app, well, GarageBand is an app. Professional musicians use it, Pro Tools, things like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
it might
Yeah.
it might come across as being more serious. But I also agree that the kind of the path of adoption that you're laying out, I think I'm seeing the same thing, and I think that as the general population, shifts towards using more AR, VR in their daily lives, then I think it will be, obviously the market will make itself, and it's just going to keep growing for something like this. But Ryan, you had something to say. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, a few things, honestly. I think that all of that makes sense. And yeah, it's just very interesting for me as a musician hearing it and thinking about, okay, what was my journey like at that point? How did I find you? How did I find it? And I think it was going just through all the games that I typically looked at, which was, very leisure gaming, like golf is one thing that I do all the time, right? But also on top of that, things like Beat Saber and like VR instruments, just standalone instruments that you could play around with. And then I just saw that, and obviously the marketing was pretty good. All right, so it worked to pull me in and grab me in there. But as I'm thinking about now being somebody that's played it and is sitting here with you, I like my mind goes to future of that. So we talk about this distinction of app, game. Is there like thought back there potentially to repurpose the framework of what Virtuoso is, potentially to expand into game verticals as well, to where maybe the framework of how Virtuoso works and functions can be pulled into more of a game focused environment, so that you're still using all the coding and instrumentation work and everything, but focused on gamification? Or is that nothing that hasn't even popped into the head as a desire?
I think that's definitely something we're always keeping at the back of our heads. I mean, obviously, because we are game designers and game developers from the beginning. So all of us who work at Really Interactive have a game development background. So that kind of plays into it all the time. So whether it is just straight up like gamification of things, like having the tutorial process be rewarding in some form, or like rewarding people for trying out new instruments or for recording new types of music, whatever that can be, that's definitely something we're looking at and are interested in. But also straight up gamifying elements of Virtuoso, like doing something that I've looked at quite a lot is, for example, beatboxing loop battles. So like when people are beatboxing and they have a loop station and they record live, they do like a 3-minute song live, just using their microphone and a loop station, and then they like battle each other and have judges judge that. That's something that I've been curious about, potentially adding something like that to Virtuoso, where you can like have a standoff between two players and just like start recording a song from zero, and then have like the community vote on the winner or whatever.
That's pretty wild. I like that. I'd be terrible at it, but
So-
I'm interested.
It's like people compete in like everything, right? So if we could include that in as like an existing feature in Virtuoso, that's something that we could potentially be interested in. Like it's not on the table right now. It's not something we're actively working on, but it's something that we consider often and keep in the back of our head. And also for learning, I think like gamifying the tutorial steps a bit more, like having you play along to a certain song, and having you record specific parts that we have defined before and completing them
Yeah.
correctly, etc.
Yeah. I like that. Have you, by the way, one thing that pops into my head, Voclia? Have you heard of that
No.
company? I'll have to send it to you. We actually are reviewing it right now. We're going to do a demo of it on the podcast as well in a future episode. But it is MIDI controller via voice. It's
Right,
of
right.
course built into the DAW, but you have it as a plugin for your DAW.
Mhm.
And then you could pull in any MIDI platform that you want to use, link the two as your input, and your voice is whatever that instrument is. So when you say like beatboxing, I'm like, man, that could be cool too, just using your voice in something like Virtuoso as well. But you mentioned one thing that I want to hit on a little bit here, and that is that you're thinking about people competing, beatbox competition. What are the ways that you see people actually using Virtuoso, that they're currently using it in these ways that you never expected?
It's a great
I've
question.
seen concerts, like people actually performing with Virtuoso on stage. I think it was at like a game event, but they were
Yeah,
performing a concert. I've seen
yeah,
it like songs being tied into Beat Saber. All of these
yeah.
things that you more than likely were never like, that's the goal, but you're starting to see. So what kind of cool things are you seeing that you're like, mind is blown?
I think the Beat Saber connection is definitely something I was not expecting, even though in hindsight it's kind of obvious. Like both are VR music apps in a way, but like people making songs and then putting them in Virtuoso, putting them into Beat Saber, and then completing them in Beat Saber as well. That's really cool. It was not something that I was expecting to see. I think also in general, it seems that some people have really found use for it to like do their own music for whatever their like their YouTube channels, their intros for their podcasts, or for like their own homemade games, stuff like that. Even though they don't have any prior knowledge in music production or composition, and that's something, a place where I think that Virtuoso could be really really powerful, just as like a super simple tool for creating your own music, even if you know nothing about music, and then using it in your other media, right? So I think I was mostly just expecting people to play around with it, maybe do some concerts. I think that's to be expected if it gets to a level where people are really good at using it. But I think the other uses have all been surprises to me.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's great. Yeah, I saw a few things and it was really incredible to watch. Let alone you said it's been a year on the market.
Yeah,
Is
just over a year. Yeah.
Fantastic.
and to see the amount of like use and adoption and it already starting to spread within just that year. Like imagine 5 years. Imagine
Yeah.
what games are going to be happening, what apps are going to be created 5-10 years from now. And that's a great segue for us to start talking about that audacious, crazy future stuff, Jonathan.
Yeah,
So
so I
let's
think
do it.
other Jonathan, you had
Awesome.
something to say. Didn't want to cut you off there.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add on the topic of like how much people have done in a year, that we actually checked our like backend databases today, and we have a thing in Virtuoso called the song library. So you can, when you're working on a song and you're completing a project, or you're just have a work in progress song that you're working on, you can upload it to like a cloud library that we're hosting, and also make it available for other people to download the whole project and remix it, continue working on it, stuff like that. And we checked today, and we have 6,200 songs in that library by now, after a year. So people
That's
have been using
amazing.
that quite extensively, which is
Yeah.
really cool, I think.
That's super amazing. Now, if I were to contribute to that and somebody were to download mine, use it,
Mm.
remix it, am I notified? Am I told, like, go check out this remix of your song?
We don't have a notification system in place yet, but we do have like you can see on the project that they do. You can see all of the previous contributors, including the original creator. And we do, of course, have like a legal disclaimer in the beginning before you upload anything, that if you upload it to the community library, anyone is free to remix it and use it in pretty much whatever way they want. So you have to be aware of that. So don't put your super secret work in progress game
I'm going to drop my
soundtracks.
album. That's where I'm going to drop my album.
Exactly. Yeah. Unless you want everyone to remix them for free.
Yeah, y'all, we got an album drop happening. It's on Virtuoso. Get on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's amazing. It's funny that we joke about that, but it's possible, which is so amazing.
You know what I love about this is we're actually kind of pointing towards, and this is what I'm going to get to in a second, but we're pointing towards the collective consciousness working on songs together and like remixing them all at the same time. But speaking of which, it sounds like, and we believe this obviously because that's why we started the Future of Music podcast in the first place, but it sounds like you're at the very beginning of a big wave that's starting to build momentum. So you're starting to get some adoption. The whole world is moving toward AR, VR, getting used to this idea. VR has been around for a long time, but it's only starting to really be like seriously commercially adopted around right now. It's still in the beginning, as you know, but it seems like, to put it in a cliche way, the stars are kind of aligning, and what you guys are doing is working, and people are taking it and having all these different uses that you never even thought about. The VR, AR wave is starting to build momentum, and it sounds like things are just going to continue to grow further and further into the future. So I have two main questions for you. One is, what do you think is going to happen with the future of traditional instruments? And then the second one is, maybe 5-10 years, what do you think the music space will look like?
Let's start with the first question. So with traditional instruments, I think if you're looking at the future there and how like future technology can affect it, I think there are some really interesting uses we're seeing for augmented reality, especially for like learning traditional instruments, where you can get overlays in AR, have notes in AR, learn notes in AR, for example. I know there are some like piano apps where you can like have an overlay to see where you should put your fingers on the keyboard, etc. I think that's just great. We can basically do gamification of traditional instruments if we want to have people have more rewarding and fun experiences learning them. And I think that will just hopefully be widely adopted eventually by music schools, etc., for teaching traditional instruments. And then I forgot the second question because I got so excited by the first one. Something about in 5 to 10 years.
So we've been talking about the music space. We haven't really touched on the music business side of things, but let's keep it within music creation. So music learning and music creation with the rise of virtual instruments. What do you see happening over the next 5-10 years?
So I mean, ideally, from my point of view, and also something that I think we might see happening is more integration of different audio applications and tools through the use of VR and AR. Specifically, AR, I think, is very powerful for this as well. And this is a direction that I'm hoping to bring Virtuoso in for more. For users who are a bit more tech savvy and a bit more into music production, to make it integrate better with their other tools, so that you could have an AR headset on with pass through or whatever mode to like see the world around you. You can use your regular tools and instruments, and you can also integrate them with completely virtual elements. Anything from like virtual mixer channels to virtual instruments to virtual, like, I don't know, effects of different kinds. And also for collaboration, I think it's potentially great. There are some challenges when it comes to collaboration in a digital space on music, especially with the issue of latency, right? Where you can easily build an application where you can play together online. But for music, especially, the faster you go in music, the more time sensitive it really is, and you can't really perform at a high level unless you have a really low latency. So that's something that I think, I'm hoping that there will be more work towards solving in different forms. I know it's not a completely solvable problem, but it's something that we can probably like mediate a bit. Like music creation together with other people online doesn't necessarily have to be super real time. It can be like, I'm creating a loop, you hear it almost instantly, and you can spin on it. You're kind of synced, but not necessarily for playing tightly live. But for creating music, you can sync it up as a multiplayer session. And I think that's super interesting, especially now in like this post-COVID world where people are doing more remote work, and everything is just becoming increasingly global in terms of where you find your collaborators, right?
Awesome. I look forward to it. Actually, as somebody that's in the DAW world and sees Cubase way too much in their
Yeah.
life, just those small things like when you see Apple Vision Pro come out, and again, it's who knows if it's going to be this thing that they're promoting it as being this great, wonderful, incredible tool. But at least it's showing you what's possible. At least it's showing us like we're going to move from this meta quest, which is great. I love it. I play it all the time, but I feel like I'm playing Wii Sports a lot of the times. But we're able to go from this to potentially this in like one transition. And just the thought of me, even in a work environment, but even further, a music production environment, of being able to put that on, go to pass through, set up my scene exactly how I want it, be in a room filled with distractions that I can remove in the world, and be a little more keyed into that creativity. I see other tools coming out that are starting to try to integrate with VR, AR for music as well. I don't know. I can't remember the name of the ring that a lot of guitarists use
Right. Yeah.
to where they can lift their hand up and do like fade in, fade out, and they can do crossfades and really cool stuff. Cut off switches for the guitar. They could do wahs. They're starting to try to integrate those with things like AR, VR, so that it could do exactly what you're mentioning, which is they could play in AR, and then they could use this as an expression tool for the guitar and in the DAW. And there's just so many cool things that are possible, and it's really exciting to see. I kind of want it now, but I know we have to wait a little bit, but it'll be here sooner than we think, I feel.
Yeah, I feel like people are usually very impatient with these things. Like every year there is a new wave of like, oh, VR is dead, it's not going anywhere. AR is dead, it's not going anywhere. And it's like, if you look at it over the last, it's only been 7 years, really, 7 or 8 years since the first like commercial VR products came out in this new wave of VR. And it's not a long time, and we already have like the Quest 2. I don't know what their sales is up to now, but like last I checked, it was like 12 million or something like that. That's quite an install base, actually. And if that's anything to go by, like the Quest 3, the Apple Vision Pro, if there is just a little bit of growth continuously, and these products just get slightly smaller every year, slightly more comfortable to wear, slightly better in terms of their like user interface and experiences, it's just a matter of time before it gets to a point where it's going to be super useful for these kinds of things.
Yeah, not only that, it'll help with that issue that you brought up, which is the majority of people using them right now are just games, leisure games. But the moment you start to break into the world of the Vision Pro, where it's marketed as this much game, the rest of it is your daily life and your workflow. I think the moment we start adopting it in that way, it becomes like us working on a computer and then being like, okay, let's play games for 10 minutes on the computer or something. It becomes a very different approach and
Yes.
a different unit and actual piece of technology in your home. I think that that's really where I hope we head and we go from, because again, I do love what I play there, but again, it is a game. Every time I put it on, it's me calling up the brother-in-law and being like, "You want to play golf, man? Let's have a beer and let's play golf." It's never like, let's get creative and create a massive painting together and try to
Yeah.
sell it. But it's always fun. But anyway, I am always excited for the world of where we're headed. I don't think it's dying
growing.
off. I think, Jonathan, you're absolutely the same. It's going to grow. Is it going to grow exactly as is? No, probably not. But they're all stepping stones to get us to the point of perfection. And I think I'll leave you with one thing before I hand it off to Jonathan for closing thoughts as well. We talked to Hoshi the other week, another really good game developer in VR, AR, and you mentioned the more comfortable they get, the better. I think he left us with, I love right now that we all have face saunas right now. That's
Yeah, it's so true.
it was like you just get a free sauna with every purchase at this
Yeah.
point. When you take it off, your face is very moisturized.
Yeah.
It's good to go. But yeah, I agree. The more comfortable, we're good. Because I can put that thing on. Even I'll even stress through the process and be like, this hurts. This doesn't feel comfortable, but it's fun. I can't leave. So I agree. But really good thoughts, Jonathan. Other Jonathan, Jonathan Boyd.
Yeah,
Let's go.
I would say that first of all, Jonathan, thanks so much for coming on and for discussing this with us. I think it's actually been a very complete, thorough, and in-depth conversation. It's been fantastic. We've explored some really amazing things. Would love to have you back on. Would love to talk more stuff with you, et cetera. There's a lot more to talk about, of course. But I think what you said about adoption and where it's going and some of the technological challenges that we have to solve, especially with getting the devices getting smaller each year, a little bit better each year, et cetera. I think you nailed it. So I'll leave it with that. I don't want to make it any worse. You said it perfectly already. So Ryan, I'll hand it to you to close us out.
Yeah, don't make anything worse.
I'm good at that.
Okay, don't do it. I won't let you. But if you haven't checked out Virtuoso, make sure to follow them on Instagram. It's just at Virtuoso VR. No spaces, no dashes or anything. Just Virtuoso VR, and I'll put it in the show notes as well, so that you can go there, or just go to virtuoso-vr.com to check it out on the website. Jonathan, my friend, it's been incredible having you on. I'm still jealous of your office. And I may be contacting my leasing manager to see how much it would cost me an extra rent to cut a hole in my ceiling. But I appreciate you being here. It's been a fantastic time. And I can't wait to keep talking. So until then, I'd just like to say thanks to everybody for listening, for watching. And we'll see you next time on the Future of Music podcast.